This is it. It's the final episode of You're All Doomed, the podcast that has dissected the Friday the 13th series 13 minutes at a time. I'm co-host Greg.
And I am the main host, Brian. And we are going to fight, and we are going to end this podcast right now.
Yes, I'm throwing in the towel. I can't put up with you anymore.
All right, that's
I'm
it.
done.
Sorry, guys. It's over.
We have some credits to clean up after the end of the reboot that we just finished covering. This was written by Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, the duo that also wrote Freddy vs. Jason. They went on to write the Baywatch movie that starred Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The director was Marcus Nispel, a German guy who started out in music videos and got on the map when he directed the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre for Platinum Dunes. He then made a movie called Pathfinder, which I remember hearing was sort of a train wreck. And then after directing this movie, went on to direct the Jason Momoa-starred Conan the Barbarian, which was kind of a disaster. The director of photography was Daniel Pearl, who has, I think, 1 billion credits, including both the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the remake. He also directed the video for the Police's Every Breath You Take music video, as well as Alien vs. Predator Requiem. So you were referring to the dark cinematography of this movie. Boy, oh boy.
It all makes sense now.
Clay Miller, the hero of this movie, was played by Jared Padalecki. He was earlier in a movie called The House of Wax with Paris Hilton, and starred in the long-running show that I've never seen a single episode of, Supernatural.
Do you know anything about Supernatural? Because, and I'm not disparaging it, like I know it has its fans. It is 327 episodes and a massive following, and I could not tell you one single thing about the show other than the fact that Jared Padalecki is in it.
My wife's niece was a fan of the show for a period of her teenage years, which is the only reason I was even aware of it. But I don't know anything about it other than Jensen Ackles plays Jared Padalecki's brother, and I think their last name on the show is Winchester, but I could be wrong about that. I don't know a thing about that show.
Because, I mean, I could very easily just click on like the Wikipedia page and find out what it's about, but I also thought it would be fun to just kind of like speculate what it's about.
I mean, I couldn't even tell you, like, I'm guessing it's not a sitcom. I don't know what channel it's on or when it's on.
I think it's on the CW, if that's even a channel. I think it's on the CW, but I don't know what the supernatural element is. Like, I don't know if they are like ghost hunters or if they're like, if they have special powers. Like I said, I could very easily just go on with Wikipedia and read the synopsis, but I would prefer to just not know what it is.
I'm perfectly
like
happy.
I think it's more fun just not knowing.
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy to have that cultural blind spot. I mean, I think they're sort of like hunky demon hunters. Maybe,
oh, really?
Or
okay,
something.
so I'm not that far off. Okay.
But again, I could be off base on that. This is just based on vague.
So it's like a Buffy thing.
That's my impression.
Okay.
I don't know that it's as lighthearted as Buffy could be. I think it's a little more like angsty. But
like Dawson's Creek meets Buffy, or maybe that's too sugary. But
that's probably too tongue in cheek. But yeah, like teen hunky guy drama, but a little more earnest and melodramatic than Buffy. Yeah, I mean, I'm perfectly happy never to see it again. That's not to say it's a bad show. I'm sure it's. I have to believe it's great. It's been on for that long. It's just not something that I've ever been exposed to, and I don't see any need to change that.
Mm-hmm.
He's also in the current running remake of Walker, Texas Ranger.
I also saw that he was considered for the role of Superman in McGee's proposed reboot of the Superman film franchise. And I don't think that's a terrible casting choice. Like, I think he's got he's got the body of like a Superman where he's not, massive, but, he could, look good in a Superman costume. He'd probably need a haircut, but he would make a decent Clark Kent. So I don't think that would have been a terrible choice.
There are certainly worse options for Clark Kent / Superman, for sure.
He also played young MacGyver in a TV movie, and he likes the smell of fresh baked cookies.
And I write, Mrs. Brian Padalecki on my journal at school all the time. Whitney Miller was played by Amanda Righetti, who I'm sure has dozens of worthwhile credits to discuss, but the only thing I care about is that she showed up at the very end of Captain America: The First Avenger, which I saw in the theater and recognized her immediately, and was absolutely thrilled to recognize Whitney from Friday the 13th in a Marvel movie.
I actually just saw a note of mine that I had forgotten about, which goes back to what we were talking about last week, which revolves around Whitney's fate. It was to be revealed in the planned but canceled sequel and terribly named Friday the 13th, Camp Blood: The Death of Jason Voorhees. The opening scene had teens playing on a frozen crystal lake, and they find the frozen body of Whitney just below the surface of the ice immediately before Jason appears and kills them. So there's your answer.
I like the idea of her body being found in the frozen lake, but I hate the timing of Jason immediately appearing and killing the people who found the body. Young Jason was played by Caleb Gus, who played young Nate in the Paris Hilton vehicle Hottie and the Naughty, and was on one episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But the real star of this movie is Jason himself, and this time he was played by Derek Mears, who seems like an absolutely delightful guy. I would love to meet him. He was one of the Predators in the movie Predators. He played the Swamp Thing on the short-lived DC Universe series recently. Appeared in Hatchet 3. Played a large henchman in MacGruber, so there's a Part 7 connection right there for you. And was in that weird movie Dragon Wars D-War that we watched one time. He also did stunts on Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
One funny credit that I saw was that he played Kick Puncher in Community, which was this long-running joke about this action franchise that one of the characters loved, and the character's name was Kick Puncher. So it's fun to see that he was the titular Kick Puncher.
How do you think he did as Jason? What were your thoughts on his performance?
I think he was good. Any complaints that people have about this movie, I would hope have nothing to do with his performance, because there's nothing wrong with what he did. I don't necessarily love the appearance. That's not his fault. But, I think he's a big guy, but not monstrous. So it kind of falls into that sweet spot of what I want to see in a Jason, which is someone that's like intimidating and scary, but not comically grotesque and huge. So he checks those boxes off for me. But, and I mentioned that I have no problem with him running. I thought he was pretty athletic. There were some, moves that he did that I thought was believable. Like he was quick, which is, not something we would always see with Jason. Sometimes they were kind of like slow reactions from Jason. So yeah, I would say my only complaint, and it's a minor one, is just how he looked. I just wasn't a fan of the wispy hair, and the mask looked fine. I thought his outfit looked pretty good, but we never got a really good look at his face, so I can't criticize that too much. But if I'm being honest, I think I preferred Sackhead Jason in this one better than Hockey Mask Jason.
Yeah, I thought that Derek Mears was pretty awesome. I liked his body language a lot. He definitely conveyed enthusiasm for being Jason. He's reportedly a big fan of the series and was thrilled to get the part and hopes to do more. And his energy was infectious. And I mean, anytime Jason was on screen in this movie, it ruled. Anytime Jason wasn't on the screen is where it started to sag. But he did a great job. They made good use of Jason in terms of savagery, and I wish they'd maybe backed off of the machete a little bit, but overall I was pretty happy with the kills that we got and seeing some new sides of Jason with his trapping and using the bow and arrow and stuff. So, I mean, I get the sense that Derek Mears had a lot of fun getting to play the character. I'm with you. I'm not a big fan of the appearance of Jason in this one. I really don't like it when he has hair. When they've shown him with even tufts of hair coming out from behind his mask, it makes me think of Michael Myers too much. Mm-hmm. And I like the idea of Jason being kind of this sweaty, shiny, smooth-skinned weirdo. Granted, part 2, he kind of had that Dave Mustaine mullet going on, but subsequent sequels ditched that for a while, and those are the ones that I think of the most. And so this one, he almost kind of had hillbilly hair or something, and I didn't care for that. I'm not a fan of the outfits that they've been putting him in the last few movies, where he's got this big, like, J. Crew jacket on. That seems a little too, like, oh, what am I going to wear today for a guy like Jason? It's a hard line to toe because, he's this kind of rustic opportunist who takes whatever clothes he can find. And he probably doesn't change every day and wears whatever is at hand. And you don't want him to look silly where he's just wearing like pants and no shirt. But this looked a little too much like an outfit to me. And I really don't like the detail that he has a holster for his machete. Then he can draw it like a sword. That just puts way too much emphasis on that implement.
That did bug me. It made him seem more like a swordsman that was going into battle. And there was a lot of emphasis put on him, unsheathing the machete and standing there and kind of posing with it. Yeah, I didn't like that. It bugged me.
A few other credits popped out at us. There were puppeteers on this movie, and I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out what they would have been doing.
I can't think of anything either, because the first thing I thought of was maybe if there was like a beating heart that Jason rips out of someone's chest or something like that, but we don't see anything like that. There's no kind of like grotesque kills where there's additional like movement or anything that would need to be operated by a puppeteer.
Right. There's nothing like Rick's head getting crushed in part 3, or I wonder. I mean, the only thing that occurred to me was maybe. We didn't really see any of Jason underneath the mask in this movie. I wonder if they had like an animatronic version of his deformed head that just they couldn't get to look right on camera or something. And so the puppeteers put in the work and got credit, but wound up not being used, or I don't know. I mean, that credit jumped out at me as puzzling.
Or there's a thankfully deleted scene with Gina the mannequin that involved some sort of motion and animatronics.
Oh, dear God. This movie was a smorgasbord of people with quotation marks in their nicknames. The electrician was Bobby Barfly Sledge, even though Bobby is already a nickname for Robert. The transportation coordinator was CP Phil Schreiber. The hair and makeup driver was Dwight Curly Carey. There was an office production assistant named Anna Lucia Chia Barry. And setting the record for end quote quotation marks, the quote Jason stand-in Daryl Wes Wesley.
And let's not forget the animal trainer, Bobby Colorado and the Wild Bunch.
That's the sequel to the Sam Peckinpah classic, The Wild Bunch. I noticed that there were 2 interns on this movie. God only knows what Michael Bay had them doing. The Jason vocal EFX were credited to Harry Manfredini. This movie was filmed in Bastrop, Texas, which is in Williamson County. Presumably it has a Chestnut Street. My final note is that I have to give them credit for not putting a shitty dubstep song over these end titles. They played the score, which is nice and creepy, by Steve Jablonsky, and they resisted the urge to put some sort of pop crap.
In terms of trivia, Greg alluded to some of this in the first episode this season, but New Line was stuck in a legal dispute with Paramount Pictures. And for a while, New Line and Platinum Dunes weren't going to include any of the elements of the first film since Paramount had the rights, which meant no Mrs. Voorhees or drowned Jason. So fun. So they decided to do a greatest hits of the first 4 films, sort of, which would be co-produced by Paramount and Warner Brothers New Line. Victor Miller, who is the screenwriter of the original Friday the 13th, said that the script was written in such a way that it could be deemed a sequel as opposed to a remake, because that meant that they could pay him less if the movie qualified as a sequel, which is really kind of a shitty move. This explains why the plot of the film is more of an amalgamation of the first 4 films as opposed to a retelling of the original film. Miller ended up taking legal action because he felt the script they showed him was more of a remake, but the story he came up with was condensed to the first few minutes of the film, and he ended up losing the battle and was paid less. So you can understand his surprise when the film was later advertised as a remake. Before this one was greenlit, we almost got a direct sequel to Freddy vs. Jason, which was Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. Freddy would be trapped inside Jason's subconscious, desperate to escape. Ash then shows up in search of the Necronomicon, which we saw in the Voorhees household in Jason Goes to Hell. Ash would be the one to kill Freddy, and then Jason, and then would go off and do a larger budget Evil Dead film.
That is the worst idea I've ever heard.
It's up there with one of them.
And then the Transformers come, and Ash fights the Transformers. Ash versus Laserbeak.
There are exactly 13 deaths in this movie for only the second time in the franchise, with the final chapter being the other one. And allegedly, producer Michael Bay walked out of the movie premiere stating that the movie featured too much sex. This coming from the guy that frequently casts Victoria's Secret lingerie models in his movies.
I feel like that's erroneous. I know that that's trivia from IMDb. I feel like they have that backwards or something. I mean, there's no way Michael Bay would say something had too much sex. I'd like to know the source for that.
Yeah, like he may have walked out of the premiere because he had another meeting or something.
Right. And I mean, how did it get that far? How did he not, how did Michael Bay go to the premiere and see that and be like, what the?
Yeah, wait, there's boobs? The proposed sequel that we've mentioned a few times this season was slated for release on October 13th, 2017. But in February 2017, right before production was to begin, Paramount pulled the plug. And Greg, I remember when this was all going down because we knew, or we were at least aware of the release date of the proposed sequel. And as we kept getting closer and closer to it, we're like, we've heard nothing about this movie. Like there's nothing about, going into production. We haven't heard casting. We haven't heard anything. So we're like, it's doubtful that this is really ever going to happen. And then in February, when they finally pulled the plug, we're like, oh no, this is not good.
Well, I'm bummed that we never got a sequel, but what did you think of this one?
I really enjoyed this movie. It's weird. I kind of look at this movie from two different ways. Like from a Friday the 13th standpoint, I think it's fine. It's not spectacular. It's good. It's entertaining. But from just like a general like movie standpoint, I enjoy it. It's fun. It's something, it's fast. It goes by really quickly. There's nothing much to dislike about it. There are things that I wish they had done a little bit better, but I've always liked this movie ever since we saw it in the theater. Every time I've watched it since. When we started the podcast, I always knew that this was one of the movies that I was looking forward to covering, and I was really excited to watch it again. And that's why I included my wife to watch it with me, because I felt like, as I mentioned earlier, I just feel like it's one of the more accessible ones that you can just kind of like jump in and just, watch it, and you don't really have to worry about having seen any of the other ones. So I don't know. I think it goes down pretty smoothly. Like I said, I don't like how dark it is. I feel like there's a lot of things that we're missing out on, primarily the tunnel sequence. The tunnels are something that as a concept, I'm excited by. And I wanted to see more of them. And we don't spend a lot of time down there. But if we do, we're kind of heading down a tunnel really quickly, or it's so dark you can't see what's going on. And I want to see more of the details around there. And it wasn't until this viewing that I made the connection that the mines that I think Wade mentioned at the beginning were probably these tunnels. I always just assumed that these tunnels were something that Jason had built over time as a way to get around the camp without being seen. And that might be partially true. Maybe he built some additional tunnels in addition to the mines, but I never made the connection that those mines or those tunnels already existed and then Jason just took them over. But I wanted to see more of them. We got so many close-ups of Jason's house and got to look at some of the details of what was going on in there. Why not go down in the tunnels and show us what he was doing to fortify these things? We got the cool trap with the rope that triggered the bell down below. Like, that's a really cool feature that Jason set up to trigger that someone was approaching and that he should probably, head above ground to see what's going on. I like that stuff. And I would have liked to have seen more things like that he was up to, but we just didn't see it. And mostly because we didn't spend any time or enough time down there, but also because it was just so dark, you just couldn't see anything.
Yeah. I mean, I have a blast watching this movie, and I have every time we've seen it. As we've done with previous seasons, if there's a movie that we haven't liked overall, we've tried to point out elements of it that we appreciate. And with this time, I was trying to look at it with a critical eye. I broke kind of our cardinal rule. We've agreed to avoid other people's comments on this series while we were doing this podcast, lest we, infect our beliefs with theirs, or unknowingly repeat something that they may have said. So we've stayed away from other podcasts and YouTube summaries and stuff. But I broke that rule in this instance before recording, because I knew that this movie was divisive in fandom, but I had never really understood fully why. So I watched James A. Janisse and his Kill Count episode on this reboot, and his main complaints were that there's not character development and that none of the characters are really likable. And the other complaint that he's lobbied against it before is that it's not giving us anything new. It's not giving us anything original. Both of those complaints are absolutely valid. And if that's enough to turn you off to this movie, that's completely fair. And I understand that. This movie's biggest weakness for me is its pace. It rockets along so fast. Now, that makes it very entertaining and easy to watch, but it means they've missed a lot of opportunities. Exploring the use of the tunnels in greater depth, yes. Maybe cut down on the number of characters and let us spend a little more time with them before they got killed. Yes, absolutely. But, that's definitely a shortcoming. I can't defend that. All I can say is that's not enough to make me not like this movie. The complaint about it not being original, again, valid, but this movie is functioning as kind of a greatest hits of the series, as you mentioned earlier. And it was a perfect one to have my wife sit down and watch, because she got kind of the whole thing. She got a quick sketch of the origin. She got to see Jason's transition from, hooded shroud to hockey mask. She got to see some, Jason being Jason. The only thing that was really missing were, there was no real camp other than the ruins that he inhabited. But, as a distillation of the series as a whole, it works perfectly fine and entertainingly. And so it's never going to be original because it's not trying to add something new. They tried to add a few new elements that I think would have worked better had them been able to flesh them out a little bit more.
Well, the way I looked at it too is I agree. It's not as original as maybe people would have wanted, but you have to understand that they're trying to reboot the franchise, and they were trying to reinvigorate it, make it familiar to the diehard fans, but also make it accessible to new ones. And so that's why I kind of view this as like the Force Awakens of the Friday the 13th grander plan that never happened, which was we're going to make the first one very familiar and accessible so that you can just dive right in and not have to, figure too much out. And then maybe in the second one, we start to dive into the mythology a little bit more. We start to show those tunnels. We start to show maybe, how he ended up there and how he took over the mines. At some point, the miners were there. Did he kill the miners and they left? Whatever. Mm-hmm. And you can start to take it into different territory and take some chances. And I don't blame them for not taking too many chances with the first real Friday the 13th movie. I mean, you can, if you're going to count Jason X as a real Friday the 13th movie, but in terms of a traditional Friday the 13th movie, you're talking 15, 20 years since the last one that we got. And if you're going to throw it back out into the general population like this, you've got to make it accessible. If it was super weird and they turn it into some David Lynch thing, people will be like, what the hell is this? And they're not going to be on board with it. You got to rope them in with something familiar so that they're going to stick around for the rest. And unfortunately, the rest never happened. So it's easy just to be like, well, this is too vanilla. Why wasn't it, why didn't they take more chances?
And I think what this one, it didn't add necessarily a ton of original ideas, but what it did was introduced an original tone for the series. This movie is very different than any of the previous installments, even the original first movie. It's much more serious. It's much more carefully crafted. There might be some missteps here and there, but it was made by professionals. It was shot by an experienced person. You might disagree with the aesthetic that he chose, but it was handled expertly, and it was trying to be scary. The humor was never at Jason's expense. The kills were never funny. They were brutal. They were unsettling. Some of the character moments were, loosely, improv'd and maybe a little bit too cartoonish. But this movie was really going for the throat. And I remember being surprised by that in the theater, and my wife was surprised by it when we watched it for this. It's just kind of badass, and that might not be what you're looking for from a Jason movie. It was kind of it hit the spot for me at that point, and so I mean, watching it in 13-minute segments for this podcast, I found myself realizing that I'd gone further than the minute marker and had, crap, I'm in minute 15. I got to stop and go back to 13 and see where it ended, because I was just so wrapped up in what was happening. And, I totally get people who don't like it and, put it lower on their lists. That's totally fine. Just like there are fans of Part 9, and I can't stand that movie. But, this one's up there for me.
We also, both of us forgot to mention that this was the first time during this entire run of the podcast that we actually watched the movie still separately, but we watched it all the way through as like a theatrical, experience, and then went back later to do a separate run 13 minutes at a time. Whereas all the other movies that we had done, we just did it 13 minutes at a time and didn't watch it in one big chunk. And that was because, at least for me, and probably for you too, Greg, is that we were excited to watch this movie again. And I didn't want to see it in chunks. I wanted to experience it all the way through, because it's probably the one, because it's the most recent one. It's the one that I'm least familiar with. It's the one that I kind of forget things about because I haven't seen it as many times as the other one. So I just wanted to watch it all the way through. And that's when I wrote my wife in. I'm like, well, you're going to watch this too. And, she didn't love it, but that's fine. She doesn't have to. But one thing that I've noticed as time has gone on, though, is just how much this movie looks like every other horror movie of that time. Whether it's like the My Bloody Valentine remake or the, Nightmare on Elm Street remake, they all just kind of look the same. And in some cases, I think it's the actual same director, but it was just kind of a look. And we're going to find that, 10 years from now, where movies that are coming out now all look the same. But I don't know. It just doesn't stand out as being different from other horror films.
You're absolutely right. But this series has always been a reactionary series. The first one was made because it was a ripoff of Halloween. It's always been the most vulnerable to the vagaries of the marketplace. It was the one that died off as soon as the slasher genre lost its luster in the 80s. It was the one that had to deal with the fact that Scream kind of took the wind out of the slasher sails and had to go self-referential. It's always been the gimmicky one. Really the only innovation this series has ever had was bringing Freddy in for the team up. But that was really more Freddy holding Jason's hand without the glove on, and less about Jason bringing something new to horror movies in general. So I think this series is kind of always going to be a representation of the trends that are going on at the time, for good or ill. I think if they were to make a Friday the 13th movie right now, it would be a period piece with teenagers dressed up to look like they're in the 80s because, Stranger Things is popular and Fear Street was popular. And it would represent what's, trending on Netflix right now. This movie came out on Friday, February 13th of 2009. Brian, you drove down to see it, but we didn't see it until Saturday the 14th. We met for lunch and then went to a fairly empty theater. And we loved it. I mean, I remember just being blown away by it from the opening. And then after the movie was over, we went back to my house and we watched His Name Was Jason, which was the rough draft of Crystal Lake Memories documentary. And so, I mean, we just kind of had like a Jason day, and I remember having a lot of fun. We had a good time. But the viewing experience that I most remember is about a year later. We mentioned this before, but we went down to your parents' lake house and watched the movie at night, and then afterward went out on the moonlit dock of their lake, and it was goddamn terrifying.
Yeah, we didn't last very long. We've never been self-proclaimed tough guys, but I thought that we would last a little bit longer out there. But it was pitch black in our defense, and we're on this, pretty isolated lake, and we're standing on the dock, and couple of minutes, like less than 5 minutes, we stood out there and we're like, all right, time to go back inside.
Unfortunately, that opening weekend was the high point for this movie. It did well, but then dropped off 85.5% in its second weekend, which is one of the highest drops ever in Hollywood. It wound up making $65 million overall, which is pretty solid for the series, but I think had to be viewed as a disappointment by the fans and the studio. A few other things of note came out in 2009. Obviously Avatar, which is, one of the most successful movies ever, but is never talked about. The Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince came out. Michael Bay's Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen came out that summer, which was also the summer we lost Michael Jackson and Farrah Fawcett. The fourth Fast and the Furious movie came out, which was Gal Gadot's debut. And Chris Hemsworth debuted in the reboot of Star Trek. G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra was released. And for horror fans, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 came out, as well as Zombieland and My Bloody Valentine 3D.
I'm just going to warn you, the taglines for this movie are pretty lame. The first one is Welcome to Crystal Lake. Another one is Jason Lives, Many Will Die. Prepare for the day everyone fears. This one is really clunky. You know his name, you know his story. On Friday the 13th, witness his resurrection.
Ugh.
And then this one is just lazy. Bad luck? You don't know the half of what you're in for.
God. Like, good luck on Friday the 13th. Not.
And I saved the best for last. From the producers of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
From the studio that brought you. I did like the marketing visuals for this. The teaser poster with Jason's mask kind of looming out of the darkness. I think that might have been a Comic-Con thing. Mm-hmm. And then the release poster of Jason kind of just standing there in the darkly lit woods. I mean, it's nice looking. And they gotta pimp the hockey mask. Like you say, this was the first basic Friday the 13th movie that we'd had in 20 years. He wasn't in space. He wasn't going to hell. He wasn't fighting Freddy. It was just a simple Jason movie, and they put Jason on the poster.
So, Greg, we're sitting here. I am raising my glass of Moonlit Chardonnay, which is from Adrian King's winery that you got me a few bottles of for my 40th birthday, which was, let's just say, not this year. And been holding on to the bottles for a while for a special occasion. And I figured it was good to crack open the first bottle, since this is the final episode of the final podcast. We finally completed 12 movies. I think we ended up, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is episode 100, which worked out quite well considering. But this has been a blast. Like I never thought we would see it through. For whatever reason, I just figured we'd get sick of it, or, there would be like a global pandemic or something that would interfere with our plans. But we pulled it off. It took us almost exactly 3 years from the start date to complete it. So it's been a long run, but it's been a blast.
Yeah, I mean, this franchise has a very loose definition of the word final. Jason is a cultural icon. There's no way he'll be down forever. They'll have to sort out all these legal issues, but there's too much money to be made from Jason for them to leave him in the ground forever. Maybe not as much per movie as he used to make, but they'll find a way to bring him back. And I mean, he's still in the zeitgeist. I mean, I was just in Ocean City, Maryland on the boardwalk and saw 10 different t-shirt designs featuring Jason. And so people still know who Jason is. There are still Friday the 13th articles on every Friday the 13th that falls in a calendar year. And so, I mean, we're going away for a while. But as you say, this has been an absolute blast. We would be having this conversation anyway every few years. So we figured, why not record it? And I mean, I'm looking forward to what we come up with the next time we want to watch all these movies. Which, I'm sort of like, hey, we're done with the show for the day. There's still a few hours left in the day. We could go watch part 1. But yeah, I mean, it's been great. You've done a great job with the production, putting all these together. Every episode has been kind of a one-man show, and you've done a great job. And I'm looking forward to what we do next. We have some ideas on how to keep the show alive until the next movie is made. So, keep us in your subscriptions. We'll pop up from time to time. And, as we always say, please rate, review, tell your friends. The more people we can get listening, the better. And we appreciate you guys sticking with us. And I hope you had a lot of fun watching the movies or hearing us yammer about them.
Yeah, I definitely want to thank all the listeners. It's fun to see our numbers go up every single month, even on months that we don't release new content. So that's really encouraging. That's really helped to keep us going. We've got some great engagement on social media. It's fun to see people get excited about new seasons and certain episodes, and also people like throwing jokes that we've made in the past back at us. It's always fun to see those things kind of pop up again. So yeah, there's been a lot of surprises with this podcast, and I'm glad that we stuck with it. And I'm also glad that it's resonated with people, because it is a pretty specific topic for our podcast, if we're being honest. So it's not for everybody, but I do like to think that even just casual, Friday the 13th fans, or even just casual podcast listeners would get a kick out of this. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's crazy that it's taken 3 years, but at the same time, I feel like that's gone by really quickly because we're constantly working on this. Like when one season is releasing, we're working on the next season, and then we're getting together to record, and then I'm editing, and then I'm sending it out. And then it's like, there's very little downtime. So in some ways I'm looking forward to the downtime, but in other ways I'm going to miss it, like I'm going to miss like the routine of like having a new movie to talk about. So hopefully there'll be something soon. But like Greg said, we do have a couple of ideas up our sleeves that will keep things out there, because we need excuses to get together. Greg and I need excuses to get together. But also I think it's important to kind of keep the message and the love of Friday the 13th continuing out there, to let people know that, that we care, that there's other people that care. Cause, if we don't express that, I don't think we're going to get another movie. So
make them remember, Jason.
There you go. Exactly. So yeah, until next time, whenever that is, hopefully sooner rather than later. Thank you again for listening. So I've been Brian.
I've been Greg.
And until next time, you're all doomed.
All doomed.